Act, which allows human remains to be auctioned, frequently disguised as modified items or replicas. This has included a fetal skeleton posed under a glass dome, a human thigh bone turned into a cane, a human jawbone necklace, and the varnished skull of a 6-year-old, often from indigenous communities in Africa and Asia stolen during colonial expeditions. Does the Deputy Prime Minister agree that it is an abhorrent for human remains, regardless of their origin or age, to be sold by auction houses and on social media sites like Instagram, Facebook, eBay, Etsy and Gumtree? And will the government take action to end this depraved practice?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for raising this sensitive issue, and it's absolutely horrifying to hear the account of what my honourable friend mentions, and I absolutely agree that that's abhorrent. And while the Human Tissue Authority strictly regulates the public display of human remains with fines or imprisonment for breaches, it does not cover sales or purchases. However, I will ensure that a meeting is made with the appropriate minister to discuss the troubling cases that she raises.
We now come to Alex Burkhardt, the Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Very happy to associate myself and this side of the House with the remarks the Right Honourable Lady made about Ukraine. Democracies must stand together. What is the government doing to bring down inflation?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think it's astonishing that, and first of all, can I welcome the Right Honourable Member to his place? And many people might not know, Mr. Speaker, but the Honourable Member was the Minister for Growth when, under Liz Truss, inflation was 11.1% and growth flatlines, so we're doing much better than he did.
Well, the truth is that this, well, actually, thanks to I'd like to thank the Honourable Lady for her standard charm. The truth is, this government isn't doing anything to bring down inflation. This government is stoking inflation. First, we had above-inflation pay rises for the unions. Then, we had a budget which the OBR said would increase inflation.
Order. Sorry. Right, I'm going to hear the question. I suggest we all hear it together, then our constituents can understand the answer as well as the question. Alex Burke.
Very kind, Mr. Speaker. First, we had above-inflation pay rises for the unions. Then, we had a budget which the OBR said was going to push up inflation. This morning, we had city economists, real economists, Mr. Speaker, saying that next year inflation would hit 3%. Does the Right Honourable Lady agree that this government's decisions mean higher inflation for working people?
Mr. Speaker, I'll ask the honourable gentleman, 11.1% or 3%?
We've already talked about Ukraine, Mr. Speaker. It was Ukraine and COVID that drove up inflation. This government is doing it to the British people. High tax, high inflation, low growth, low reform. There's a word for that, Mr. Speaker. It's Starmerism. Yesterday, like many honourable members on this side of the House, I spoke to farmers from across the United Kingdom. Some of them families who farmed their land for centuries, elderly men in tears, children worried about their parents, all of them worried that their way of life is about to be destroyed. What would the Right Honourable Lady like to say to them?
Well, first of all, Mr. Speaker, we are absolutely committed to our British farmers, and that's why we've committed £5 billion to the farming budget over the next 2 years. That's the largest ever amount for sustainable food production in the UK. And it's alongside £60 million, Mr. Speaker, to support those affected by extreme wet weather, and over £200 million to tackle disease outbreaks. His party couldn't even get the money out the door for farmers, failing to spend over £300 million on farming budgets. The farmers know they ruined it for them, and that's why we're in government and they're not.
Well, perhaps the right honourable lady thinks that everyone came to London yesterday to thank the government. Let's look at the facts. A typical mid-sized 360-acre family farm in the constituency of my right honourable friend for Thirsk and Moulton. They've spoken to their accountant. Their new liability because of this government is £500,000. That's 12 years' worth of profit. When this generation passes away, that farm will become totally unviable, and it's just one of thousands and thousands of similar farms. It's clear the government hasn't got its facts right. The Central Association for Agricultural Valuers, the real experts in this field, say so. The NFU says so. They're shortly to publish a report showing that 75% of all commercial farms will fall above the threshold. If the government isn't going to reverse this terrible policy, will the right honourable lady at least commit that there will be no further increases to inheritance tax and no further reductions to agricultural property relief or business property relief in this Parliament?
Well, Mr. Speaker, he talks about the facts, and I absolutely stand by the figures the government has set out. And the vast majority of estate owners will be totally unaffected. He wants to talk about the figures, Mr. Speaker. I will be crystal clear. The vast majority of estate owners will see no change and pay no tax on land passed on valued at £1 million. Couples can pass on £3 million, Mr. Speaker, tax-free, and those above the thresholds will pay only half the normal rate and can pay over 10 years interest-free.
This is just another part of the budget that's unravelling, Mr. Speaker. Everyone here and all the farmers at home will have heard there was no guarantee there. We know what that means. They're coming back for more. And even if the honourable lady had made a promise today, it wouldn't have been worth a fig. We know that the Environment Secretary, before the election, promised the farmers this wouldn't happen. Labour promises get broken. Let's put all of this into context. The Treasury says the family farms tax will raise, on average, £441 million a year. The Treasury also says that the public sector pay rises the government announced in July will cost £9.4 billion a year. That's over 21 times as much. Why does the government think that above-inflation pay rises for the trade unions are worth so...
Order! Now then, I don't need any more from the second bench. Can I just say, please, less of it. We've had a bit of a run-in recently and I don't need to have any more. Right. Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it's an audacity for the honourable gentleman to stand there and suggest in some way that Labour broke promises or raised taxes. When I'll school the honourable gentleman, it was his government that raised taxes to the highest level for a generation. It was his government.
Sorry? We'll have less as well, unless you want to go and have a cup of tea. Have we heard any more? Is that it now? Yes or no? Absolutely, you're the one that was mouthing. Well, I'm sorry, you must be able to do it like a ventriloquist dummy. Prime Minister.
It was his government that crashed the economy, that saw inflation rise to 1.1% and growth flatline. It was his government that spent the reserves 3 times over. I'll take no lessons from the honourable gentleman.
Alex Burkhardt.
I understand why the right honourable lady doesn't want to answer questions about the terrible choices the government have made. It's because the truth is ugly. The truth is that this is a punishment meted out to people who don't vote Labour. It's the same punishment meted out to parents who send their children to private schools. It's the same punishment meted out to the owners of small businesses terrified about national insurance contributions. And it's the same punishment meted out to pensioners who can't afford to pay their fuel this winter. Isn't it the truth, Mr. Speaker, that if you don't vote Labour, they don't care about you?
There will be more, and it won't be what you want more of. Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, after that display, he clearly didn't recognise the result of the general election. in. While this government has been fixing the mess that they left, the Conservatives have been desperately trying to rewrite history. They come here every week, jumping on a new bandwagon, taking a new pot shot, but absolutely no word on what they'll do differently. Last week, the Leader of the Opposition admitted she supported Labour's plans to invest in NHS, schools and homes. But what they want is all the benefits of the budget, Mr Speaker, but have no idea how they'll pay for it. Mr Speaker, the faces may change, but it's the same old Tory party. Straight back to putting everything on their credit card, spending their reserves 3 times over. We took the difficult decisions to fix the £22 billion black hole that they left behind, and while they're reinventing the past, we're investing in the future.
Andy MacDonald. MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In a new report, Human Rights Watch have set out irrefutably how Israeli authorities are committing the war crimes of forcible transfer in Gaza, which amounts to crimes against humanity. Israel's evacuation system fails to ensure civilian safety. Civilians are not provided with access to health, nutrition and shelter, compounded by the banning of UNRWA, with much of Gaza now uninhabitable. Will the government acknowledge that Israel has carried out mass forced displacement in Gaza, and will it take concrete measures on arms trade and Israeli officials in order to comply with its duty to prevent genocide and protect Palestinian lives?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The situation in the Middle East is catastrophic, and I know the whole House is horrified at the terrible loss of civilian life. We are calling at every opportunity for an immediate ceasefire with the release of the hostages and more aid into Gaza. But we do urge Israel to ensure that UNRWA can continue its life-saving work, something the Foreign Secretary has discussed directly with the Israeli Foreign Minister. And we've imposed sanctions in response to appalling incidents of settler violence and suspended export licences for arms following a review that found a clear risk that they may be used to commit or facilitate violations of international law. And we will continue to seek to a two-state solution with a secure Israel, Mr Speaker, alongside a viable and sovereign Palestine.
Come to Daisy Cooper, the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Speaker. May I associate myself and the Liberal Democrats with the Deputy Prime Minister's remarks on Ukraine. Ahead of the budget, I warned the Deputy Prime Minister that increasing national insurance contributions on social care providers would make the crisis in social care worse. Now, OBR figures suggest that the increase in NICs will cost more to social care providers than the money that the government has announced for that sector in the budget, meaning that that measure alone could withdraw £200 million out of the sector. Will the Deputy Prime Minister speak with the Chancellor to make sure that, at the very least, health and care providers are protected from taking the hit?
Well, I thank the honourable member for that question, and the Chancellor is sat near me, and I know that through those discussions that we had, that we wanted to ensure that we protected social care. That's why we confirmed £600 million of new grant funding for social care next year, Mr Speaker, an uplift to local government spending and an £86 million increase to the Disabled Facilities Grant. Our Employment Rights Bill will help deliver the first ever fair pay agreement for social care sector as well, and we'll also make sure that the NHS is funded to help with the social care situation as well.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's clear that social care providers will be worse off, so I do urge the Deputy Prime Minister and the Chancellor to look again at that. Somebody else who was very worried about the budget is Cathy. Cathy is a farmer in my constituency of St Albans, and she told me yesterday that she thinks the government changes simply do not make sense. The changes mean that her family may have to pay a bill which will force them to sell land, which makes food production unviable. At the same time, the government has not closed the land buying tax loophole that can be exploited by equity firms and the super wealthy. Farmers told me yesterday that they feel like they were betrayed by the Conservatives, and they now feel they were betrayed by the Conservatives. Thank you, Mr Speaker. Farmers told me yesterday that they feel as though they have been betrayed by the Conservatives, but they now feel like they have also been lied to by Labour. Will the Deputy Prime Minister think again on this measure so that our farmers can feed Britain?
Well, again, Mr Speaker, I'm sorry to hear that Cathy is distressed by what I would say is scaremongering around what the Labour Party is doing. The budget delivered £5 billion for farming over the next 2 years, a record amount. The last government failed to spend £300 million on farmers, and our plan is sensible, fair and proportionate and protects the smaller estates while fixing public services that they rely on.
Alex Baker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. There are only 7 places in England, according to the House Library, where school funding per pupil is lower than my constituency of Aldershot and Farnborough. Does the Deputy Prime Minister agree with me that something has gone badly wrong when teachers are being forced to pay out of their own pocket for basic school supplies, and so many others have left the profession in droves over the past 14 years?
14 years.
Will ministers work with me to tackle the root of this problem so that we can give every young person in my constituency and beyond the very best start in life?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And every child deserves the opportunity to succeed in school and beyond. And I'm sorry to hear of the experience in her constituency. Last week I visited Raisingfield Primary School in my constituency, whose school council had a lot to say about the resources to our schools, and we have increased the core schools budget by £2.3 billion next year, increasing per pupil funding in real terms. And as her constituency, home of the British Army, I know she will also welcome the expansion of childcare support to service families deployed overseas, saving families around £3,400 a year. And I'm happy to ensure she gets a meeting with the relevant minister.
Anderson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Just a few weeks ago from that dispatch box, the Minister for Rural Affairs said that he'd been congratulated by a farmer over the introduction of the inheritance tax. Now, I think this farmer must have been a cannabis farmer, because just yesterday we had 10,000 farmers on Whitehall protesting against this madcap decision. So does the Deputy Prime Minister agree with me that this decision should be thrown in the trash can along with Rachel from Accounts' CV?
Well, Mr Speaker, he talks about CVs. It's good to see the honourable member doing well on his bench, once a Labour councillor, then a Tory MP, and now a Reform Chief Whip. Every time he switches party, he gets a promotion. Mr Speaker, I've already outlined what we've done to support our farmers, and we'll continue to support the farmers, and we'll continue to invest in our public services to get Britain back on track.
Graham Stringer.
My right honourable friend has come under intense scrutiny from the press at different times. She must have found it very difficult. A press free to scrutinise politicians is absolutely vital in a free society and a democracy. Is she as concerned as I am about the Stasi-like interview that was given to Alison Pearson, the Daily Telegraph journalist, a week last Sunday? And does she agree with me that the Essex Police Force and other police forces would be better trying to deal with shoplifting, burglaries and other crimes rather than intimidating journalists?
I thank my honourable friend for that question. And also, it is incredibly important around free speech and our press. It's part of our democracy. But it's also in direct response to his question. Of course, police are independent and it's a live investigation, and therefore it wouldn't be appropriate for me to comment on that. But I do believe that we should have a free press. It's part of our democracy, and we should have free speech. But with that comes responsibility of those that do it.
So keep that.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Yesterday, I met with 3 constituents in Parliament, Duncan Hawley, his wife Nicola, and his 10-year-old daughter Hattie. Duncan is a sheep farmer, and he's stewarded his family farm for most of his life. He's outraged and hurt and worried about the government's deeply damaging family farm tax. And he's deeply worried about food security, food inflation, and whether we'll even be able to pass that farm on to future generations. So my question to the Deputy Prime Minister is very simple. Why has this Labour government declared war on British farmers?
Well, I say to the honourable member and to Duncan and Nicola that this government hasn't declared war on farmers. The vast majority of farms will not pay any inheritance tax, and we have protected them. We have been as generous as we can, and the farmers rely on our public services like everybody else. We inherited a £22 billion black hole from the Conservatives, who spent reserves 3 times over. We are investing in our schools, our hospitals, our public services and housing. And if the honourable gentleman wants to suggest what he would do differently, if he doesn't agree with that, like the Leader of the Opposition, then he should say so.
Mr. Speaker, the previous government failed countless women through chronic underfunding of maternity services. At Stroud Maternity Hospital, postnatal beds have remained closed for over 2 years. Local midwife-led units like Stroud deliver fantastic quality of care for women whilst having really low intervention rates during birth. Can the Deputy Prime Minister outline what steps this government will take to improve maternity services?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that question. I'm sorry to hear about the situation in Stroud, and I thank him for raising this important issue for women in his constituency. The Gaza report clearly set out that under the previous government, the NHS was broken, with patients waiting too long for care. We're committed to ensuring that all women and babies receive safe, compassionate and personalised care through pregnancy, birth and, critically, following those months ahead. We will ensure maternity services deliver the best outcomes for patients as we invest to build an NHS fit for the future.
Roberts.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Lefarydd. Now, I know how much professional care work means to the Deputy Prime Minister. Carried care homes in Porthmadog tell me they won't be able to absorb the additional exorbitant costs imposed by her government's budget. They tell me they believe this poses a threat worse than COVID to their business. Wow. Will she personally intervene, therefore, so that her government at least makes care providers exempt from the rise in employers' national insurance contributions?
Well, she's absolutely right to say that I absolutely value the work of care providers and carers across the whole of the UK, and that's why we've put additional funding in through the budget as well. And we've also been making sure that care providers and those that work in the charities, including hospices, amongst the tax regime provides the most generous amongst in the world, Mr. Speaker. This includes tax release for charities and their donors worth over £6 billion for the tax year of April 2024. We put record funding into our NHS. We've increased funding into adult social care and children's social care, and will continue to support our public services that were left on their knees by the last government.
Fred Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2 weeks ago today, the Chancellor announced a historic £22.6 billion investment into the NHS because it is our duty to rescue this country's health service after 14 years, sadly, of mismanagement, underinvestment and, unfortunately, also misleading announcements from the party opposite. In Plymouth, Derriford Hospital, where I represent, serves not just my constituency, but 19 constituencies across the South West. It is the only major trauma centre for adults in the South West. However, we have really suffered from those decisions from the Conservatives. Can the Deputy Prime Minister outline how that historic investment is going to make its way to Plymouth?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for being such a champion for Plymouth, and as he knows, we're providing £25 billion extra over the next 2 years from the Department for Health and Social Care, including the largest capital budget in real terms since 2010, and we'll make sure that every corner of the UK can see the generosity and how that will improve services for them. And I'll make sure he gets a meeting with the relevant minister to discuss in detail how Plymouth will be able to capitalise off that.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The town of Cheshunt in my constituency of Broxbourne has no banks or building societies. We've been told we're not eligible for a banking hub. We've been told we're not eligible for a banking hub. Does the Deputy Prime Minister agree with me that every town that wants a banking hub should be eligible for one so that my residents can have access to their hard-earned cash?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we've committed to 350 banking hubs through this Parliament, and I'm sure the Minister will be happy to meet with him on that point. But I'm also hopeful that he also will be thankful of the Levelling Up Fund Round 2 money that we secured, with £14.3 million going to Waltham Cross Resistance Project, regenerating the town centre for his constituents.
Jonathan Hinder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know better than most that under the last Tory government, neighbourhood policing was stripped away, leaving the police invisible in towns like those I represent in Pendle and Clitheroe. As a former police inspector, I'm delighted that the new Labour government has committed to rebuild neighbourhood policing. Yeah. Can the Deputy Prime Minister assure my constituents that Labour's neighbourhood policing guarantee will soon ensure that every town has a dedicated neighbourhood team? Yeah.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank him for his expertise in this area and for the work that he did previous to coming to this place. Tory austerity has decimated neighbourhood policing, and we'll put thousands more neighbourhood police and PCSOs back on our streets to ensure every community has a named local officer, and we'll tackle illegal drugs, half-night crime, crack down on antisocial behaviour and go after the gangs who lure young people into violence.
Dr. Andrew Burris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Scottish and Welsh governments have banned the construction of new waste incinerators because of health and pollution concerns. The last government paused them and committed to banning them. Why then is this government busy approving them?
Well, Mr. Speaker, planning, as the honourable gentleman knows, we always follow the strict rules in regard to that, making sure that safety and other factors are always taken into consideration, and will continue to do so.
Yuan Yang.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thousands of families in my constituency of Early and Woodley have moved into new build developments in Shimfield, in Loddon Park and beyond, but many have found their dreams of home ownership punctured by unfair and opaque property management charges. Can the Deputy Prime Minister reassure my constituents by setting out how the Leasehold Reform Bill will address these concerns, and would she like to meet with me and affected constituents?
Well, I welcome my honourable friend to her place. Unjustified increases in service charges are completely unacceptable, Mr. Speaker. The Leasehold and Freehold Reform Act will provide homeowners with greater rights, powers and protections over their homes, and that includes greater transparency over service charges. For too long, leaseholders have been ripped off. It's this government that will sort it out.
Fan of the House, Sir Edward Lee.
Today is Red Wednesday, in which we remember all those persecuted for their belief worldwide. A recent report by Aid to the Church in Need shows that in the countries surveyed, persecution of minorities has increased by 60%. In the light of this, will the government commit to reappointing the Prime Minister's Special Envoy for Freedom of Religion and Belief, a post that has remained vacant since July, and do that as soon as possible, hopefully by Christmas, so that we in the United Kingdom can play our part in defending religious and belief minorities worldwide?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. We are committed to champion human rights, including the right to freedom of religion or belief. I join the right honourable member in marking Red Wednesday, an important moment to show support for all those persecuted around the world for their religion or belief. And today we will light up the FC DO buildings in the UK in red in support of that, Mr Speaker. Envoy roles are under consideration, will be decided upon in due course.
Lee Burrow.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Harshita Brella was killed and found in the boot of her car as it was taken from her home in Corby on the 14th of November. This tragic murder left the community shocked and scared and is being investigated by the police. Harshita was protected by a domestic violence order that lasted 28 days. It was not renewed. Would the Deputy Prime Minister agree that all must be done to reassure the community and to bring the perpetrator to justice? And would she further agree that in some circumstances, domestic abuse orders should last longer than 28 days when the victims are most vulnerable?
I thank my honourable friend for raising this case, Mr Speaker. Hajita's family, my thoughts are with her family in this horrifying set of circumstances where Hajita should have been protected and felt protected. This government is committed to halving violence against women and girls, Mr Speaker, and we continue to do our work, hopefully across this House, to make sure that we can end circumstances where Hajita faced and we can stop this kind of barbaric action.
Lincolnshire.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Spelthorne Litter Pickers are an outstanding organisation of 1,000 volunteers who do great work up and down my constituency, come rain or shine. And last week, they were awarded the King's Award for Voluntary Service. Would the Deputy Prime Minister, the Government, indeed the whole House, like to join me in congratulating the Spelthorne Litter Pickers and to thank them for all that they do?
What can I say? I absolutely agree with the honourable may I say my honourable friend in terms of the Spelthorne litter pickers, and say what an important role across all of our constituencies where local communities come together and volunteers help. In particular, young people as well do a lot of this in our constituencies, Mr Speaker. So I think across the whole House we congratulate them on their award and those that do the voluntary work and support our community.
Well, Barker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I draw the House's attention to my register of interest as a very proud trade union member. In 2019, the party opposite promised to deliver an employment bill that would protect and enhance workers' rights in the UK, and like so many of their promises, they never delivered. But my right honourable friend has done it. Cleaning up the mess that the party opposite left behind. So would the Deputy Prime Minister agree with me that her employment rights bill is the biggest upgrade to workers in a generation?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And declaring an interest, me and my right honourable friend used to be conveners for Unison North West as well, and I champion the work that she's done on behalf of her constituents and for working people of this country. The government is delivering on its plan to make work pay and to ensure that employment rights are fit for a modern economy. And the Employment Rights Bill will benefit people in some of the most deprived areas of the country and will save them up to £600 per year in lost income from hidden costs of insecure work. So I commend the work that many honourable members, some across the House and in particular on our benches, that have brought this bill to fruition.
Reb Stewart.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The whole House recognises the authenticity of the Right Honourable Lady's backstory, her pride in being a carer, and indeed in her recent elevation. By contrast, in June, the Chief Constable of Northamptonshire was sacked for misrepresenting his CV. And just last month, Tanya Nasri, the nurse, was imprisoned for 5 years for doing the same. Does the Right Honourable Lady agree with me that such serious consequences are right and just in such cases?
Well, Mr Speaker, what I would say to the honourable gentleman, I know where he's trying to go with this, but while it's tempting, what I would say to the honourable gentleman is, sorry, the right honourable gentleman. I do apologise. What I would say to the right honourable gentleman is our Chancellor in the last 4 months has shown more competence than the last 4 Chancellors that he had.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My home city of Edinburgh, despite being Scotland's capital, is the lowest funded per head local authority in Scotland, due to austerity inflicted on us by the SNP in Holyrood. That means great projects like the Ripple face closure. Now that my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Scotland, has secured the biggest block grant to Scotland in the history of the Scottish Parliament, will the Deputy Prime Minister work with me to ensure the Scottish Government uses that to end austerity for my constituents?
I absolutely agree with my honourable friend. He's entirely right to raise the impact of SNP's irresponsible management of Scotland's finances and the austerity that they're inflicting on his constituents. Our budget rejected a return to austerity, and we delivered the largest funding settlement for Scotland in real terms since devolution. The result of the budget is clear, Mr. Speaker. The SNP have the powers, they have the money, they have no more excuses.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I was contacted last week by a constituent whose husband has stage 4 bowel cancer. He had a routine scan in June but didn't receive the results until early November. And unfortunately, within that period, he received unsuitable chemotherapy and his cancer has progressed. Given that Shropshire has the worst record in the country for CT and MRI scan results, can I ask the Deputy Prime Minister the same question that my constituent has asked me? When is the government going to address this problem?
Well, I'm sincerely sorry to hear about your constituent's husband and the terrible diagnosis at stage 4 and the delays in that. We've set out before how difficult the inheritance was in terms of the cancer diagnosis waiting list. People are waiting far too long for treatment. It's why the Chancellor put record money and funding into our NHS so that we can catch cancer on time. And I know that the Health Secretary is determined to do this, and it's a personal endeavour to him to make sure that people are not having to wait and don't end up in the circumstances that are so tragic for your constituent.
Just for the record, I'd like to apologise to Mr Kruger. I got the wrong person. Mr Wilder's now owned up to it. What I would say is don't... What I would say to the honourable member is, don't sit next to him again. Right, that completes Prime Minister's question. Right, we come to the first urgent question. Lisa Smart.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I would like to ask the Secretary of State for the Home Department if she will make a statement on police reform.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I start by thanking the Honourable Lady for this urgent question on this very important subject. At its best, policing in England and Wales is truly world-class. Every day, officers perform their duties with courage, skill and dedication, and we are all grateful to all of them. At the heart of our British policing tradition is the notion of policing by consent, which is dependent on maintaining mutual bonds of trust between officers and the local communities they serve. But over the last decade or more, policing has faced a perfect storm. As visible neighbourhood policing has been decimated, as law enforcement has struggled to keep up with fast-changing crimes, as outdated technology has held forces back, and as confidence has fallen in communities and amongst victims, because far too often people feel that if something goes wrong, no one will come and nothing will be done. But for too long, instead of government showing leadership and helping the police to navigate these testing times, predecessors in our department have just walked away. This government will not stand on the sidelines while public confidence and public safety are put at risk. And that's why we're pursuing our unprecedented Safer Streets mission, to reduce the most serious violence and to rebuild confidence in policing and the criminal justice system. Now, to successfully deliver that mission, we need forces that are fit for the challenge of today and tomorrow. That is why the Home Secretary yesterday announced a programme of police reform that will be pursued in partnership with policing. And under our neighbourhood policing guarantee, we will restore patrols to town centres and rebuild the vital link between forces and the people they serve. To drive up performance and standards, a new performance unit will be established in the Home Office, which will use high-quality police data to spot trends, improve performance and consistency. And we will work with policing to create a national centre of policing to bring together crucial support services such as IT, aviation and forensics. We will present a white paper on police reform to Parliament next year. The 25-26 police funding settlement for police forces, including full details on government grant funding and precept, will be set out to Parliament in the normal way before Christmas. But the Home Secretary confirmed in her written statement yesterday that as part of that settlement, direct central government funding for policing next year will increase by £500 million. That's core grant and additional funding for neighbourhood policing, counter-terrorism and the National Crime Agency. Mr Speaker, we are at a critical juncture for policing, and we cannot go on as we have been. So together with the police, we will embark on this roadmap